For those of you who have been watching my videos for some time now, you'll know that Sternritter D, the death-dealing Askin NAKK VAAR, is one of my absolute favourite characters in the entire series. And throughout all of his appearances in the final arc, I was always curious as to who he would eventually have his final battle against. He does spar up against a couple of characters through his time in the storyline, whether that's Mayuri or Oetsu or even Ichigo and his gang later on in VAAR, but his actual final battle comes about courtesy of Yoruichi Shihoin, which is a really unexpected but frankly refreshing pairing that I didn't see coming. However, when Yoruichi does go down during that fight, who should take over but Kisuke Urahara himself to finish Askin off once and for all. And when Kisuke showed up, I was so excited because it really felt to me that, yeah, we may actually get a proper fight between these two. If you've seen my top 10 favourite Bleach characters list, you'll know that both Askin and Urahara make that list. So I was really excited to see the possibilities and hope that we would get a great fight between the two of them. And in this video, we're going to be looking at just that. This latest Bleach battle analysis will focus on the fight between Kisuke Urahara and Askin NAKK VAAR and everything else in between. Before we begin, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to hit that button down below for videos like this every single week. If you're a Bleach fan, you're in the perfect place, so I hope you'll join me. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, because it really does help spread the reach of the video on YouTube and help it be seen by more people. I'd really appreciate it. If you want to take that support for me and what I do here a step further, we do now have a Patreon where we are inching ever closer to 50 patrons. I think we maybe need one more perhaps, so I'd love to hit that milestone. If you want to support me over there for as little as $1 a month, you can do, and a huge shout out goes out to everyone who is already supporting me there, so thank you very much. So, Kisuke versus Askin. This is a fight that I have pretty obviously been really wanting to talk about, hence why I've just decided to do this one. Normally I do put a poll out for battle analysis videos, and I will do, there probably is one out now perhaps. If not, it's coming out soon, but I really wanted to talk about this fight. Now, you could maybe argue that this battle and the one preceding it involving Yoruichi and Yushiro is all part of the same big fight. However, Bleach Wiki separates these two into two separate battles, so that's the approach I'm going to take here. And to be honest, I think I'm going to talk enough about the Kisuke and Askin fight alone, where we will need two videos anyway. And yeah, bringing these two characters together was such a great idea on Kubo's behalf. They're actually very similar characters in many ways. They're both very genre savvy. They seem to know that they're in a manga, it feels like. They're always subverting expectations and just demolishing tropes of the series, and just being standout characters who are almost unlike anything else in the show. They seem to feel like they're having a great time all the time, and bringing them together was bound to lead to some gold. And it does, although I have to get a complaint out of the way straight away. This fight is way too short. It is way too short, only lasting from chapter 664 to chapter 666. It is so short. It's criminal. And I think there's some really interesting things going on with the pacing here that I want to address as well before we get into the fight itself. So it seems to me that when starting the VAAR sub-arc, Kubo really wanted to take his time and give each member of the Schutzstaffel a major, lengthy and satisfying battle. And actually I think he does succeed in that regard for the most part. However, I think time was against him here and he overindulged himself on the first two battles, Mayuri and Nemu versus Pernida, and then Kyoraku and Nanao versus Lille. It's no coincidence, I don't think, that there are flashbacks in those first two fights and then no flashbacks in the Askin and Gerard battles, which again is a huge shame. I think Kubo probably spends too much time on those fights and realised, actually, I have to wrap this thing up soon. And I think the biggest casualty of this is obviously Hashwolf. Hashwolf and Uryu basically don't get a fight because Kubo clearly had to toss up between that fight and Ichigo and Yuha, and probably rightfully chose Ichigo and Yuha. So that Hashwolf fight kind of gets left to the wayside, but it's fascinating just taking a look at the VAAR sub-arc in a nutshell and seeing how these fights play out, because There's also no denying that the Askin and Gerard fights are shorter than the Leal and Pernida fights as well. It can really feel that way because of how broken up they are, but they're actually still very lengthy in their own right. I think Askin fights for a total of like 8 chapters altogether, which is still pretty good going, and I am quite happy with that. I will say though, again, before we get into the fight itself, I'm nearly certain that this is the fight Kubo was going to show Kisuke and Yoruichi's history together, their flashback. It makes total sense. He said prior to this arc that he was going to show their backstory together. That was one of his early promises he made. You've got backstory for characters like Nemu and Nanao and Kyoraku happening, and then you get to this fight and there's no backstory, and I'm like, okay, I feel like we were going to get that, but we are running out of time, which is a big shame, and Kubo obviously was really starting to feel the effects of his illness towards the end of the series as well. So I'm grateful that we got what we did, to be honest, because all 4 members of the Schutzstaffel do get pretty damn good fights. And so let's move on then to Kisuke versus Askin. It is only about 3 chapters long. It takes place after the bulk of Askin's fight has actually already happened. So for some context, Askin's been fighting Yoruichi. Yoruichi has mostly been beating him around. Kisuke has actually already arrived at this point to sort of work with her against Askin, which is a really nice dynamic. And using her Shunko electric cat form, the true name of which escapes me, she defeats Askin to the point where he has to use his holy form, Hashane. And Yoruichi at this point succumbs to the poison that she's already been afflicted with, leaving Kisuke the only person left who can deal with Askin, who's now in his Volstendig. And I think the stage is set for a really awesome battle. One of my favourite panels, actually, in chapter 663 prior to this fight is the scene setting panel where you see the massive gift ball deluxe like completely enveloping a huge part of the Zweite Ast that they're on at the moment. And it looks really great. It's a great sense of scale, really shows you just how massive this ability is, and it really sets the stage for an awesome fight to come. And so now that we're here on chapter 664, what do I think of this fight? And it's great. You know, it's just as good as I was hoping it would be, and without hyperbole, chapter 664 is probably like in my top 10 favourite Bleach chapters of all time. It has everything I would love in a chapter in it, with like the ultimate cherry on top at the very end. So with chapter 664 then, Askin has just revealed his Volstendig Hashane. He's using it to counter the ever-changing Reiatsu of Yoruichi's cat form, essentially. And he looks cool, I like it. His Volstendig is nice and understated, very much like his character, very in keeping with his character. Reminds me of Kurge Opi's Volstendig, actually, in that it just slightly changes some of their outfit, but a bit more so than the vast majority of holy forms do, but less so than some of the outright transformations. But he looks really cool. I love the visor. That's a really nice little touch. And he kind of confronts Kisuke, and he's just like, you know, I've got my new Volstendig. I'll explain to you what it does. He tells him everything about it, that he can adapt to the changes in the poison, basically so that Kisuke doesn't try anything different. After that, Askin activates an ability called the Gift Berike, which is basically the deadly poison domain, apparently in English, which is cool as hell. And you see the gift ball deluxe that he has created around them. He then summons essentially, like, I don't really know what they are. They're like modular nodes, I guess. These like white modular nodes that then like attach themselves to the outside of the dome. And this creates this inescapable poison fortress, essentially. Basically, Askin's making it so that neither of them can escape. You get a really nice moment here as well, where Askin says, you know, I don't like to speak in definitive terms. I think that the guys who do sound like that end up coming across as losers, you know, whose bite doesn't match their bark. And this, again, is a fantastic example of Askin just crushing Bleach's own tropes. Kubo comes across as extraordinarily self-aware when writing this character, because the vast majority of Quincy and Sternritter's talk in these absolute terms. The vast majority of these characters say things like, a Shinigami could never destroy me, a Shinigami's Bankai is pathetic in comparison to me, I am God, my power is divine and unstoppable. So many of these characters say the same thing. So it's incredibly refreshing for Askin to come across and be like, I don't say that sort of rubbish, you know, I like to remain understated and keep my keep my composure, and I think that way, I come across better. And he's right, because then after that he says, so you need to take what I say now as serious as it can be. It is impossible to escape from this domain. And therefore, it's really good. You know that he's telling the truth. It must be physically impossible to escape, because he doesn't normally say things like that. And it's a really clever way, actually, of establishing that. But now we get the moment that I love the absolute most from this chapter, which is the major dialogue sequence between Kisuke and Askin. And this is Kubo snatching this golden opportunity to have these two characters together and have them actually talk. And that's kind of a big part of this fight in general. What's important about it is not necessarily the fighting. There are some cool choreography here, but really it's too short to really get into a crazy fight. But the actual talking they do is awesome. It's so good. And so basically Kisuke's like, well, if you wanted us to stay so badly, you could have just said so, and we would have done. And then we get it kind of comes out of nowhere. I feel like it does feel a little contrived to get to this point, where Kisuke basically just says, it feels to me like you're not acting completely out of loyalty towards Urahara. And if you know the Sternritters, if you know how they operate, this is completely unacceptable. They all live and die quite literally for His Majesty. So for one of them to maybe not be completely loyal is like a really out there thing, especially one of them who is so close to His Majesty. Like Askin is literally part of Urahara's elite guard. So for Kisuke to kind of throw this idea out there, it's a pretty big deal. And Askin kind of turns around and says, that's pretty rude of you. I think I exude loyalty. I have as much loyalty as a Pomeranian, which is quite a nice line. But then he says, actually, though, your assessment isn't completely wrong, and I find His Majesty to be interesting. And I remember reading this for the first time, and I was like, yes, Kubo is giving Askin a motivation, like an actual motivation for the fact that he's in the Sternritters, other than just, I want to serve His Majesty, or I'm terrified of His Majesty, or something like that. This character has a singular motivation that singles him out from the rest of his comrades, and it's a cool one as well that I really enjoy. And it helps to flesh out his character even more. And also, it's so good that he's against Kisuke here for reasons we'll get into. So basically, Askin says, Kisuke, you look like you're the kind of man who has seen everything there is to see in this world. Everyone knows who Kisuke Urahara is. He's this decorated scientist. And in many ways, what Askin's saying is true. Kisuke probably has seen just about everything there is to see. And so he says, how often do you think someone like Urahara comes around? He says, if I hypothetically let this moment go and decided, not to work with Urahara and let him die, when do you think we would get someone with this kind of vision again? He says that the fact that Urahara wants to destroy all three worlds and build something brand new is so... he's a visionary. That's basically what Askin is saying. He's saying that he doesn't follow Urahara because he necessarily believes in him. He just follows him out of a sick curiosity, basically, to see what would be created in the wake of his destruction. And it's fascinating. I think it's really fascinating. He even says to Kisuke, aren't you the tiniest bit curious to see that as well, to see what new world would be built? And I remember reading this, and it was really interesting, actually, because I was really holding out hope that Askin would survive. Because so far he had come across as so relatable, and that was the reason it felt like he was in the Schutzstaffel, was to be the grounded one compared to these godlike characters. And then I remember reading this and reading his motivation, and I just thought he's probably gonna die. Because that's a pretty messed up motivation. Basically Askin, in some ways it's even more messed up than the majority of Sternritters, because at least they believe in something. Askin doesn't really believe in anything. He doesn't care about the Vandenreich cause. He doesn't care about the other Sternritters. He doesn't even care about Urahara. He's just curious to see what the new world would look like, and he's happy to let all three worlds be destroyed to get there. And Kisuke obviously doesn't take too well to this either. He basically just tries to strike Askin immediately. And he says, I don't agree with you. Kisuke even mentions that maybe Mayuri Kurotsuchi would share Askin's demented vision. However, he would never want to sit around and just wait for Urahara to create this brand new world. Mayuri would almost certainly want to create it with his own two hands, as that's what it means to be a true scientist. This whole thing is just so fascinating to me. This whole conversation is so interesting. There's a lot of subtext here, I think. One of the tropes that the Vandenreich is missing is that of a mad scientist character. They don't really have one. Obviously Mayuri and Kisuke and Aizen to some degree are all mad scientist tropes in the Soul Society. You've got Xyloporo in the Urahara arc. They don't considering how massive the organisation is, they don't really have one in the Vandenreich. Askin is probably as close as it comes. His abilities are all like modular node themed, almost like DNA themed. And he fights Kisuke, which is, a pretty good indicator. But I love this dichotomy. These two characters are like diametrically opposed, just in their way of thinking, which permeates to their very being. One thing you need to know about Askin is that he is a follower. He's very, lethargic, he's very understated, and he likes it that way. That's how he makes it. He doesn't want to appear too much of a big deal to anyone, basically. He likes to just chill out in the shadows. But this is all part of a sort of bigger machination, I think. He's a little bit, not Machiavellian, but he is quite sinister in the way he does that. That's how he's survived for so long. He lets other people take the lead, essentially, and he's very happy to do that here as well. He's like, I'm not fussed about creating a new world, but I want to see what His Majesty does. Whereas Kisuke is the total opposite of that. Kisuke is the driver of events, the driver of fate and destiny for so many people. He takes action, whereas Askin lets other people take action. That's the kind of crucial difference between these two. And Kisuke is really lambasting him here, I think. He's properly outlining the difference in their philosophies, essentially. And it's just a lovely moment. It's a really great moment where Kisuke is really standing up for what he believes in, what it means to be a true scientist, what it means to bring about change. It doesn't mean to just sit on the sidelines and let someone else do the dirty work, It's about getting your hands dirty yourself. Now, if this were any other villain, they would have absolutely flipped out at this insult and just been like, how dare you? They would have done an Asnot where he was like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. But not Askin. Askin just gets this crazed smile on his face, and he's like, that's a pretty good answer. I really like that answer. However, we kind of get to this unspoken agreement that their viewpoints are irreconcilable, so they have to fight. And Askin's like, but I still want to see what His Majesty will create. And he activates Gift Ring. Basically, one of the rings around his wrist expands massively, and he holds it over his head. He's got this great pose where he's kind of like this. He just looks really funny, but it's all part of his eccentricity. But yeah, clearly realizing that they probably won't be able to find mutual ground, he launches Gift Ring at Urahara. And it's a really cool ability. It spirals towards Kisuke and then disappears at the last minute. And Kisuke's like, where's it gone? And it reappears in his eye before bursting his eye. And it's pretty gruesome. It's a really cool visual, though. Actually seeing it in his eye is pretty gruesome. Looking forward to seeing how they do that on the anime. But yeah, Kisuke's eyes just blow up. There's loads of blood, and Askin's Gift Ring condenses the ability of death dealing into one small area. So, if he had attached it to Kisuke's arm, it would have probably destroyed his whole arm completely or something like that. But Askin chooses to blind him, and he basically says, I have to use this on people who the death dealing doesn't really affect that well. And you can kind of see this because Kisuke's been able to mostly maintain his composure despite being inside the Gift Ball Deluxe, which is crushingly suffocating him, essentially, and poisoning him all the time, which is something I don't think Kubo did a good enough job of really showing. Kisuke is sweating, and Askin mentions a couple of times that you shouldn't be able to even move at this point, but I think we could have done something really cool with showing this crushing, suffocating ability affecting Kisuke. But regardless, Askin says, you've left me no choice. I now have to basically use Gift Ring to destroy you bit by bit and then kill you. At which point Kisuke says, okay, well, you had this coming. Don't say I didn't warn you. And he activates Bankai. And that's the end of chapter 664. That's what I mean by the ultimate cherry on top. It's a great, great chapter that gives us amazing character moments between these two brilliant characters who remain very true to themselves, but also continue to just shatter Bleach tropes. And then it ends with Urahara Kisuke's Bankai, of all things, like one of the most anticipated reveals of the entire series, no questions asked. Kanon Biraki Benehime Aratame. And one thing I don't necessarily appreciate, and I've mentioned this before, is the rushed nature of Kisuke's Bankai reveal. You can really see it when you read the whole thing again. If you go back and read the VAAR section of the story again, you can really feel it. Kubo, and I'm two halves of a coin. I'm two halves of a coin because clearly he really wanted to give us a Kisuke versus Askin showdown, and he was also clearly so out of time. He was like, I have to. I really want to do this, and I'm glad that he did. But Kisuke's Bankai just literally appears. It just appears behind him. This huge woman, this massive wooden doll that looks amazing. Like, the design is as incredible as ever. You get a tiny little bit more build up at the beginning of 665. You see like a shadow sort of building in front of Askin, but that's unfortunately it. A big nice double page spread though of the Bankai with its hands around Kisuke like that, which again looks awesome. But you think about the amount of fanfare that Kyoraku's Bankai had in the last fight, literally the fight previous to this one. He's against the wall. There's like an entire chapter of build-up to the fact that he has to use Bankai. Brings his swords in front of him like that. You get the massive page spread. Then you get all the sky turning dark. Whereas Kisuke's Bankai is literally just, it's right there. But, I'm glad we saw it at all, to be honest. So moving then on to 665. It's easy to break this fight down because it's only 3 chapters long. This is another great chapter. Another really awesome chapter because I love Kisuke's Bankai. I think I've mentioned this, I've done a whole video on Kisuke's Bankai in the past. I think it fits him perfectly well. But yeah, it's awesome because the massive doll appears behind Kisuke and Askin's like, what the hell is this? I didn't have any detail on your Bankai given to me by Yhwach. And Kisuke's like, well, I've never really used it in front of you guys before, so you wouldn't know what it was. And Askin tries to leap away from it, and as he does so, his arm is just split in half, right down to the end of his finger, which is another really nice visual. And there's a void inside it. And it's not like an injury, it's like it has literally been pulled in two. Which is, again, just really creative. And as he then, at this point is when he tries to run away. And as he does so, his arm stitches itself back together again. And we find out from Kisuke as the massive doll's hands close in over his face and start working away at his face, that his Bankai has the ability to just simply restructure anything it touches, and the hands pull away and reveal that he has his sight back. It's genius. I've mentioned it before. I think maybe you'd be underwhelmed by the fact it just has one ability, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, that one ability can do everything. And that's what's so clever about this Bankai. It is the man with the unknown means. That's his Bankai in a nutshell. It can do anything from this one ability, and I think that's just so cool. It works really, really well. It fits Kisuke down to a T, and I absolutely love it. And it kind of looks kind of sinister as well, which I think is really cool. The the stitching appearing on his face, some kind of homage to Frankenstein or something, which, would make a lot of sense because Kisuke, is a character who has been known for essentially playing God in the past, and now he's got Askin really on the back foot. And I think that's, again, another kind of allegory to their differing philosophies. Kisuke has transformed himself, rewritten his own body to gain the upper hand on this fight, and I think that's so cool. It works really well for the character. But he just leaps towards Askin, cuts him across the shoulder. There's stitches following them in the sky. Askin sort of spins around, Kisuke spins around, and they clash blades. And it's a great moment. God, I wish this fight was longer. Because moments like this are so good, but they're so short. Askin's now got like this molecular staff thing that he's kind of got out of nowhere, but it looks cool. And he's like, how are you doing this? I destroyed your eyes on the spot. And Kisuke's like, they were destroyed, but they were restructured. And then you get this really nice, again, I keep saying this, but they're all great moments. You get this awesome moment where Kisuke brings out his free hand and you watch it unravel, and then it re-ravels and gets stitches all over it where he's used his Bankai to restructure his arm, give himself more physical power, grab his blade with two hands, and just smack Askin like across the cityscape. Great moment. And like this is a fight that I really do hope the anime extends even just a little bit. You know, just give us a little bit extra with Kisuke's Bankai. Give us a couple more examples of how he can use it. You know, show him restructuring his legs so that he can like leap miles in the air or like jump really far or run fast or something like that. I'd love to see that sort of thing. But Askin like goes smashing through the buildings, and then Urahara's running towards him, and Askin's like, no, this is not how this is supposed to go. You know, I thought we were having a nice little chat, but you're turning this into a battle of physical strength. And, you know, he brings his staff around him. And as Kisuke's trying to make it towards Askin, Askin says, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to dial up the poison in here even more. And the Gift Ball Deluxe just starts freaking out, like it starts warping and distorting. And it's like basically becoming very, very thick, laden poison in here that's just like should be crushing Kisuke and pushing him to his knees essentially. And Askin's like, you know, if we're going to do this, then that's fine. I'm just going to keep dialing in the Gift Ball Deluxe's poison to the right amount until you won't be able to stand anymore. But unfortunately for Askin, Kisuke has him beat because he's now got Askin focused purely on him, which means he's very unaware to something that's going on behind him. And you know, the fight is too short. Like, I can't believe Kisuke's only just using his Bankai, and I'm about to mention this is the end of the fight. But behind Askin, somebody just punches through his back, like rips his heart out as well. And it's just there in front of his face. It's super gory. One of the best defeats in Bleach. Like, it's up there for me with Byakuya versus Tsukishima and how good, like, smart and satisfying a defeat it actually is. It's really well done. And Askin's like just staring at his own heart, which is awesome. And it makes a lot of sense as well because like this sort of thing should already be saved for an Askin video. But because of his ability, the death dealing, because of his, again, nature, the way he tries to appear like an underling and stay out of things, he always says that he feels very far from death's door. Like death is always felt so far away to him. Like even as he lies there on the battlefield at one point, he's like, even with all this rubble surrounding me, I just won't die. Like I basically can't die. And it's so fitting to see his death comes from him staring at his own heart, essentially, looking at his own mortality in the eye. And it's Grimmjow. Grimmjow has come up behind Askin, punched him through the back and ripped his heart out in like a real display of just animalistic ferocity. Ironically, the likes of which Grimmjow would never have been able to show in the Urahara arc because Kubo's just gone off the wall at this point with like the maturity and like the themes and just the gore in this arc, which is just so good. And I know the anime has a later time slot, and I hope they leave this in as it is because it's just gonna be perfect. But yeah, basically Kisuke says, you know, you said that the gift Berike was inescapable, but you never said it was impenetrable. And so basically what he's done is he's used his Bankai to create a hole in the Gift Ball Deluxe miles away to allow Grimmjow access. He's then basically used the Bankai to restructure the space around them to create a portal for Grimmjow to jump into and then jump out of again behind Askin and punch him in the back. And you can see the pathway of that portal by the stitches in the ground leading up to Askin right behind him. And then at the start of the next chapter, 666, you can see that portal in the floor beside Askin where Grimmjow has clearly come out of. So it's really, really clever. I think it's a great defeat. It makes a lot of sense. Like Askin, you know, had already defeated Grimmjow a little while back and kind of mocked him a bit and moved on. And it's cool to see Grimmjow kind of get his revenge, essentially coming in from outside the Gift Ball Deluxe, moving along that portal of stitches, essentially, to jump out behind him and finish him off. And Kisuke's like, thanks for your help, Mr. Grimmjow, as Grimmjow just destroys Askin's heart. And then we move on to 666, which is the final chapter of this fight. Criminally short fight. Askin just collapses to the ground. And you might be thinking, well, how can this be a chapter of the fight if Askin's already on the floor? And actually, the fight still carries on for about, I would say, 80% of this chapter is still this fight. And, Askin's on the floor and he's like, oh man, I thought I defeated you. I'm surprised you're back up. And Grimmjow's like, how the hell are you still talking? I just pulled your heart out. So even now, Askin is struggling to die properly. Urahara's like, I appreciate your help. And he says that, on the way here, I healed Mr. Grimmjow and we set this whole thing up. And Askin's like, just utterly in disbelief that Kisuke had thought that many steps ahead. And Kisuke's like, well, why? It's a war. This is a life or death situation. I can't help it if I, so as to avoid myself being caught out, I come up with every possible solution ever. And it's nice to get this moment, and it comes across as like a really sinister thing, the way Kisuke looks. You get the impression that Kisuke goes into every battle thinking it could be his last, and he prepares for every possible eventuality. And it's nice to get that side of Kisuke verbalized, like actually get it out in the open. This is how this guy thinks, he is the ultra-prepared one. To the point of it almost being a bit of a joke, but like actually hearing it and it's deadly serious, I think is really cool. And I think it makes Askin feel like he wasn't taking the fight as seriously as he could have done, even though he probably was. But like Kisuke was always fighting for his life, which I think is really, really cool. And it's a distinction again between the two of them, because as I mentioned earlier, Askin has always had this very lackadaisical attitude towards death, perhaps where you could say he didn't respect death. The idea of death being, I guess, the death dealing has made him feel like he has a control over death, that he metes it out to other people instead of actually having to deal with it himself. Whereas Kisuke is like, I fight every battle by the skin of my teeth. Like every fight I go in with so many preparations because I don't want to die, and it could happen to me, so I prepare myself for that. And Askin's like, that's amazing, you really are this incredible guy. And then Grimmjow just stabs him again. He's like, you need to die now. And then Grimmjow says, we've completed our contract. This is referencing something way back at the start of this arc that doesn't really make that much sense at this point in the story, I don't think. Basically, in about chapter 519 or 18, I want to say, after the first invasion, Urahara reveals to Ichigo that he has made a contract with Grimmjow that should make him safe to be around. So we can get that one stipulation of that contract was that Grimmjow had to help Urahara, I guess, if he was in danger of dying, or just defeat Urahara's enemy, perhaps. I don't know what Grimmjow gets out of it, because you never really find out. I'm guessing, knowing Kisuke, maybe he's like offered up Ichigo as like a rematch opportunity or something, but we never really find out. However, just as the two of them are discussing this, they suddenly get afflicted again by the effects of the poison. Both of them are just like, oh, what's going on? Like Grimmjow crashes down to his knees and he's like, I don't understand what's happening. And it's revealed that Askin is still alive, barely hanging on at this point. And Grimmjow's like, can't believe it. And Askin sort of like kind of gets up a little bit and he's like, oh man, when I die, the Gift Ball Deluxe goes haywire. Like, it's a contingency thing in his shrift that when he dies, the Gift Ball Deluxe just magnifies in toxicity. And he said, and basically, you get another lovely moment where he goes out with a lot of dignity, I think. And he actually says to Kisuke, I would love to spare you. Like, I would love to spare you out of respect, but I can't. At this point, it's too late. The lock has been taken off, essentially, and the Gift Ball is just going nuts. And he says, you get a great moment though where Askin sort of forces himself up onto his hands and he looks at Kisuke and he just sort of says like, but I'm sure, Mr. I'm never caught with my pants down, we'll find some way of getting out of this. And then he kind of just collapses and dies and he says, I've said this spiel many times before, so I'm not going to say that this is a fatal situation. And then he just dies and the Gift Ball goes crazy. And it's a brilliant end. It's a brilliant end to a brilliant character. Like, maybe I'm super biased, but I just love the way that he tries to show respect to Kisuke. You know, he tries to, he says that I want to spare you, but I physically can't. But I'm sure you'll get out of this somehow. And it's really, really nice. And Kisuke does have a contingency planned. Nelliel is waiting just outside the gift ball in case it does go nuts, and she's about prepared to go in and rescue them all. But it doesn't end well for Kisuke, though, because the effects of the poison take hold pretty quickly. We see his Bankai collapsing behind him. An involuntary dispelling of the Bankai is a sign that you are very close to death. And the Bankai just collapses to pieces behind him. The mannequin falls apart. And Kisuke just collapses to the floor, like spraying blood out of his mouth, like looking really unwell. And blood is leaking out of his stitches as well. And he basically says, like, I'm done here. Like, I'm going to have to leave it to you now, Ichigo and Rukia. Him saying Rukia, still a bit weird, but considering she does absolutely nothing after this. But it's a cool end to the fight. And Grimmjow, like, collapses as well. He's like, I'm not going to let this be the end of me. And they both just, like, fall to the ground. Kisuke falls to the ground in a pool of his own blood. And that is the end of the fight. That's the end of Kisuke Urahara versus Askin NAKK. It immediately cuts over to the Gerard battle, and I'm not going to lie to you, I could have easily had an extra chapter of this fight and one less of that fight, but it is what it is. It's what we get. For the most part, I love this fight. I think it's so well done. Despite its short running time, Kubo crams a lot of greatness in here. You really do get the sense that he wanted to show us this battle, I think, even though he was clearly running out of time. But it's just so nice to get it anyway. You get great character moments from both Kisuke and Askin as they explain their juxtaposed philosophies that just can't quite be reconciled, and so they must fight. You get Kisuke's Bankai. If you remember it for one thing, you should remember it for that. It's an awesome Bankai that looks really cool, and again, Kubo crams in numerous ways the Bankai can be used, powering up Kisuke's arm, restoring his sight, creating a way for Grimmjow to traverse. In that, you have healing, strength, and traversal, all in the span of one chapter. So yeah, it's a shame that this final segment of the fight is so short, but like I said, the majority of Askin's fight takes place prior to this skirmish, this duel, in a way, between these two characters. And the twist ending with Grimmjow showing up is just brilliant. So that's it, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the battle between Urahara and Askin. Like I said, I'm going to put up a poll very shortly, if it's not up already, for the next Bleach battle analysis. Thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and give the video a thumbs up. And until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.